Are you ready to perform at your highest potential? Thank you for joining this GP Strategies webinar, where we'll explore best practices and innovative insights to help you and your organization improve performance.
And so what we do is we collate that from global and then reflect that against what we're hearing in APAC. And we hone and refine some of these learning trends so they're as specific and relevant for you guys here today. So a little bit of background about me. I look after GP Strategies, Asia Pacific countries, including Malaysia, Singapore, and Australia. I head up our leadership and employee engagement practice. So leadership and employee engagement and professional development is my vocation. It's my background for the last couple of decades. But since around 2015, I've really been heavily involved in looking at the transformation of learning and how can we meet reskilling challenges, leadership development challenges, employee engagement challenges at scale without diminishing impact. So that's a little bit of background. I'm currently based in Australia. I should say kind of partially locked down in Australia is probably a more appropriate way to say it. And I'm sure a lot of you on this call can agree with that. So welcome to 2022. I hope you're all having a good start to the year. I know it's been a difficult last 12 months for a lot of people, both professionally and sometimes personally. So I just want to recognize that and really appreciate you guys for joining. This session will be interactive, and we're going to start with that right now. And for this session, instead of using the WebEx tools, we're going to use the Mentimeter tools. So whether you want to have something up on your screen, on your laptop or PC, and you want to separately interact on the polls and discussions via your phone, you can either open a separate tab on your browser and go to menti.com and enter the code 2280148, or on your phone, you can still do that and or scan the QR code. And I'll be taking us through some various interactions, but they'll all be happening on menti.com. So make sure that you've either scanned that QR code with your phone or you've accessed the link and entered the code on your phone or your mobile device. So I'll give you all just a second to go ahead and do that. And so once you're in, keep it open because we will be using this and coming back to the same series of questions throughout. So don't close it once you've opened it. Keep it open in a window or on your phone as we progress through. So let's go to the first interaction, which is the option just for you to drop a pin on where you are. I see you're already there. Some of you have already done that. I've only included Asia Pacific. You're in North America or Europe or in Africa, Middle East, just drop a pin somewhere in space and we'll know that you're somewhere. Or if you really are from Venus or Mars or the moon, please feel free to try to drop a pin in the appropriate place. So we've got a bunch of folks in Australia. We've got a bunch of folks, some folks in China. Looks like some people in around Singapore, Malaysia area. I'm seeing pins dropped around the Philippines. I'm seeing pins dropped in Indonesia. I'm seeing a really good spread and distribution of folks. I'm just going to leave this up for a bit longer. So you can see at the top, you've got menti.com and you can enter your code. So for those of you still just logging in and joining, please go to menti.com and enter in that code. You can do it on your phone or you can do it on a separate browser tab in your web browser. Seeing some more come up there. Already loving the fact that we've got a nice distribution. I know we had a few folks from India sign up, so I'm surprised I'm not seeing some pins dropped over in India. Maybe those folks haven't been able to join yet. We've got so far a whole bunch of folks on. We've got some people up in maybe Beijing I can see up there if my geography's still serving me well. Some more pins coming up in and around Indonesia. Singapore is definitely coming up strong. So hopefully you're all finding the appropriate menti.com and we'll continue to use that as we go through. Okay, great. So now hopefully you're logged on. We've done a little exercise. Now it's time for another exercise straight away using menti.com. So I'm going to change here. So this is all about the learning trends of 2022. But before I tell you what our trends are, I'd love to hear from you. So your screen should have refreshed by now. I'd like you to type in, what do you see as the trends that you're experiencing in 2022? So go ahead and type that on the screen. What are the trends that you're seeing in your space? The L&D trends, to be to be very specific. I'm seeing the word online coming up. Seeing hybrid, virtual learning, no time for training. Well, that's a good challenge to try to address. Coaching, technologies coming up a lot. Skills marketplace. Yeah, I love that. Yeah, flexible is a really key word that I'm seeing. We're seeing virtual dominating though. Leadership is coming up the ranks here. It's getting bigger in size. Yeah, bite-sized tech, uncertainty, micro. What else have we got? Digital learning, definitely. Gaming, yeah, gamification. I would have written gaming too, because gamification is going to take some time to write that. Yeah, resilience is a theme. I think that's something we can all identify with both in and outside the learning space. Scalable, yeah, whoever wrote that, totally on point. And we're going to actually talk a little bit about scalable, flexible, virtual, how it all fits together. Let's see, what else have we got? Some new ones coming up. Fast, customized, innovation, learning fatigue. Yeah, that's really interesting, and that's something that we're actually going to have a webinar on later in the year, actually, before the end of the first half of the year, to talk a little bit about, hey, if learning has to be continuous, if the world that we're moving in requires a lot of learning, how do you manage learning fatigue? I think that's a really interesting conversation. So thank you to whomever posted that. Yeah, so we're seeing a lot of trends, and so let me show you now the trends that we came up with. But first, the first trend we want to talk about, which you guys have said, is hybrid work. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that. How do we enable the hybrid workforce? In fact, what we're going to see with these trends is they flow onto each other because of trend one, trend two, because of trend two, trend three, and so on. So we're going to talk about the evolution of learning in the flow of work, what that really means, what are we going to do about it. We're going to talk about trend three, which is the focus, an increasing focus this year on evolving L&D roles and mindsets. I think 2021 and 2022 was a lot about exposure and 2021 was finding our feet. 2022 was about kind of taking some extra steps to continue to grapple with it. I think there was some time spent in 2021 where we were thinking that things were going to go back to normal, and hey, guess what? That's a mirage. It's not going to go back to normal. So now we need to focus on the realities of the evolution of L&D roles and mindset, not just in L&D teams, but in our business and in our stakeholders and learners. So trend four, we're going to talk about prioritization on scalable, upskilling, and reskilling. Right? That's been a trend for some time now due to automation and changes in the way that we work, but we're going to talk about that. We're going to talk about expanding the application of immersive realities and play with purpose. And don't worry, for those of you who have come on a little bit late, I'm going to share that code when we come up to our next interaction. I just saw that come up in the chat. We're going to talk about the rise of the boundaryless academy. So learning academies that really cross boundaries. And finally, we're going to talk about how do you sustainably integrate innovation as a capability. I want to manage expectations a little bit here, and I want to be super clear that we're not going to deep dive at great detail into each of these topics. This is not the learning how to do. This is really covering the trends and some of the things pushing those trends and a couple of key takeaways, for us to bring forward. So let's start with a little quote, and I really love this quote. I've always resonated with Brené Brown's quote in this area. So Brené Brown is an American, researcher, author, speaker around leadership and resilience and vulnerability. And this quote really just resonated with me for 2022. Failure can become our most powerful path to learning if we're willing to choose courage over comfort. So why did I pick that quote? And I've got to be honest, it's kind of selfish. It's really related to my experience in my role trying to help companies navigate this change and these transitions to different ways of learning. And one of the trends that I've seen over the last couple of years has been this awareness that we've got to do things differently, this awareness that I'm going to take next steps. Sorry, my headset keeps on turning off here. Forgive me about that. Yeah, it's this awareness that we know that things need to change, but then when it comes time to actually making the change, and I'm not going to say this is universal, but a big experience of mine is this trepidation, this fear of failure, this desire to keep one foot in the future and one foot in the comfortable place. And the kind of problems that organizations are facing is they try to keep feet in the safe and in the future kind of more perceived as risky area. And I think if we're really going to take these steps forward, Brene Brown's got it. You know, expect that sometimes there's going to be some failure, but most importantly, you know, we have to choose courage over comfort if we're going to embrace the fact that, hey, you know what, these changes that brought about as a result of the pandemic, they're not going anywhere. In fact, they're only going to continue. And what they've really done is unearth some things which we'll talk about in this session. So what are the overarching themes? And I can see some people commenting in the chat that they love Brene Brown, bit of a hero. So I'm totally on board with that. Well, what I'm going to get across here is, for me, 2022 and for GP strategies, and when we look at all the trends, 2022 is a year of intentionality. It's about being focused, and it's about making really intentional decisions about how you're going to go ahead and meet your learners, meet your business where it's at from a learning standpoint. There'll be a strong focus on, given that the workforce has moved towards hybrid work, how do we enable the hybrid workforce and the tools and resources around our workforce? So let's talk a little bit more about that. And we're going to bring up those details to engage in our polls in just a second. So enabling the hybrid workforce is our first trend, responding to the transformation from virtual and local to hybrid. And I like that emphasis on the word hybrid, you know, because for a lot of people, when we started dealing with the pandemic, the big focus was on virtual. That was what hybrid meant, but we really need to redefine that. So let's have a look at that. So again, I'd like you to take some time here to go on, if you've missed out on logging in, go either to menti.com, enter in the code 2280148, or on your phone, you can scan that QR code. Make sure you have that open. We'll be using it throughout the entire session today. I'm just going to leave that up for a couple of seconds. So, which statement most reflects the state of work in your business? Most employees are still working from home. Employees are mostly back in the office. Employees must, the emphasis is on the word is must. We're mandating that they must split their time between home and office. Employees can choose when and how they work. And the final one, hard to say, the situation is constantly changing. Go ahead and tell me where you sit. Oh, wait, sorry. I realize you're probably not seeing it. Okay, I think now that should be there. My apologies, guys. It should be there now. Please go ahead. I thought everyone had fallen asleep, but now I know that it was my fault. This is the new version of, hey, you're muted. Hey, Ben, you haven't changed the polling slide. So consider that, and let's have a look at the state of work for your businesses. Okay, I'm just wondering why the results aren't coming up. Give me a second. I am seeing some results come in. I'm going to fix this up for you guys. Okay, here we go. Hopefully you guys can see some of the results coming up now. So we've got most employees are still working from home as the majority. We've got a blend here of employees are mostly back in the office. And then we've got kind of even spread on companies who are kind of choosing to split, hey, 2 days in, 3 days out, something like that. Employees can choose. And we've got a whole bunch of people in the hard to say that's constantly changing. I guess what I want to try to get across about this trend of hybrid work is that, and what research is telling us is that, and there's been some research actually by a few different organizations. McKinsey did some research on this recently. And this is what I'm going to show you in a moment. But the research from McKinsey, where they surveyed two separate sets of research, surveying both C-suite and then surveying the employee workforce, one big fact that came out is employees don't necessarily know what they want. And this is kind of triggering and influencing the great resignation that some of us are experiencing in some markets. But one thing is certain is that they are reevaluating their relationship with work. That's happening whether we like it or not. And the other big thing that we're seeing is that employers tend to be underestimating the disconnect and maybe failing to realize actually that there is, the finishing line is not the end of this pandemic. We have this idea that, hey, when the pandemic ends, everything's going to go back to normal. But what we have to say is that it's a mirage, that there is no finishing line. What's really occurred is that the pandemic has brought forward things that had been simmering for a while. And so let's go deeper into that detail and talk about what's the state of hybrid work. So in that research that I was mentioning, which was just performed in 2021 and reflected on research held before the pandemic, when C-suite and employees were asked, what's your desire for fully on-site work? C-suite, 52% of C-suite said, this is post-pandemic, said that we want that our business needs to be fully on-site. But post-pandemic, employees are saying that 37% of people want to see fully on-site. So that's a pretty big gap there. But the challenge is, that's not the major point I want to make here. The major point I want to make here is that this is not a new issue. This is not a new divide. Pre-pandemic, 92% of C-suite said, that our business should be working fully on site. And there was a massive gap even pre-pandemic, 62% requesting fully on site. So this is not new. The desire for a new way of work has been present for some time. And I think what's happened is the pandemic has accelerated that. So it's not a new problem. It is just something that has emerged. And that's why the big thing we need to take away from this around hybrid work is that the finish line is a mirage. There isn't a finish line. This is a new normal, and that it's continuing to evolve because employees are still figuring out what it is they're looking for. And there's a connection into the great resignation, which is people moving on and doing things and trying to figure that out for themselves. Of course, there's more to the great resignation than that, and that's not what this session is about. So what are some of the finer points here? Employees are reevaluating their relationship. The pandemic is not the finish line. A lot of research is talking, and also our experience working with customers is, as you move through trying to figure this out, there needs to be some equity and sincerity in the process. It can't just be, hey, let's do a survey and find out what our employees are saying, and then let's reflect those survey results back to them. There has to be some analysis into what's going on. What are employees not saying as in these results? What are they telling us, but that's between the lines or behind the scenes? And equity, meaning, maybe it's not just a survey is enough. Maybe there needs to be focus groups. Maybe we need to make sure that we're engaging our workforce at a deeper level so there's an equal voice in this process. Another big focus, and this is a learning focus coming out as a trend in 22, is leadership mindset. We're seeing that this is a big gap between senior leadership and employees, is that if your team managers, your frontline and your middle level managers aren't equipped with the same mindset that the business shares, the same awareness, if they're not equipped with the same sincerity in understanding what's going on, then that communication doesn't happen. And that's typical of all change communication, right? It has to be a continuous cascade. It can't just be, that the business is aware of it, but then the people in the middle aren't really towing the line. So a focus on leadership mindsets is important. I'm seeing some chat come in. I suppose the survey outcome may differ from geography to geography. That is true, but I will say that that McKinsey was a global study, and we can include links to that later. But yes, it would vary from locality to locality, and I encourage you to read the research in detail to get a feel for that. Yeah, so we've got to design, as a result of this hybrid workforce, we need to decide for when and where and how we are working, right? And we need to make sure we've caught up with that. I know that our big pivot was let's design for virtual, but what else can we be doing to enable learning for hybrid working? And that's what we're going to talk about in the next session. You'll see that these trends build on one another. And the finer point here is denying or ignoring the disconnect is not a strategy, right? And that's obviously not rocket science, but I really wanted to get that across. And that comes back to that point of thinking that there's some sort of a finish line for this. So let's go to trend number 2, which is the evolution of learning in the flow of work. We begin with the moments of need and build a rich ecosystem of resources, putting learning within everyone's reach. That's what we're talking about with the flow of work. But I want us to do a little activity here where you're going to go back now to your mentee, and I want you to drop a pin on where does L&D spend most of its budget. And I'm going to describe these to you, right? When I learn something new, when I need to learn more of that same thing, when I first apply it, when I need to solve a new problem using that new learning, or when things change. Think of this as a continuum. These are all the moments of learning need. The first time I need to learn it, when I need to go deeper, when I apply it, when I solve a problem, and when things change. Drop a pin on where you think that is for you. Go ahead. Where is your L&D budget primarily allocated? I can see we've got a bit of a spread here. So we've got some solve and change. And if you're putting it in solve and change, drop in the chat of the WebEx where what industry you're in. I'd be interested to know that. Just waiting for some more results to pop up. So definitely, I think we've probably got a majority in that earlier section in the new/more area, right? And then we've got a good amount in the solve and change area. Now, I've got to ask you guys, for those of you putting in solve and change, so let's say I've been to a training, whether it's virtual or whether it's in a classroom or e-learning or a blend of all of it, and now I'm on the job and, I now need to solve a problem. I'd be interested, tell me in the chat, what resources, how are they accessing learning? How is the budget being spent to support people? I'm 3 months after the training and I've encountered a problem. Tell me how your L&D budget is supporting people at the moment when they need to solve that problem. It's 3 months out from when they first learned like a problem solving skills or some technical knowledge. Give me an idea on that. Yeah, I think Oliver said, should training be eventual shift to training in the moment of need? And that's what we're talking about. Learning in the flow of work is about aligning your training spend, your training design, your training culture with the moments of learning need. That's exactly what we're talking about, Oliver. So Laura said, yeah, through follow-up and coaching. Yeah, and I think that that's a great way to provide support to people post the moment of learning need, or post when I first learned something. But in general, it's probably true to say that a lot of training budget for some organizations sits in this first area, right? When it's something new or when I need to learn something more, right, is what we would call training assets. So these would be, maybe some classroom training, some virtual training, some e-learning. And for some initiatives, for some segments of our population, we provide performer support. So I would say like our top talent and our senior leaders often get coaching, often get some follow-up support. But if I've got 5,000 employees or even 1,000 employees, it's not always easy to provide performer support across the business, right? If I've provided that training, right? And a great way to do that is to get your managers coaching. And herein lies the challenge. How do you create a coaching culture in my managers? But a lot of budget tends to go in that first group of creation of training assets, and some goes into performer support. And I think our research would align with where I saw those spots coming up. But learning in the flow of work, as Oliver pointed out, is all about thinking about our training design, our training culture, the way our academies work, and aligning that to the moments of training need. And in a world of hybrid work, where learners are even more even if I've got one office in Sydney or in Singapore or in Shanghai, now people might be distributed across multiple locations even within that town. So how I actually reach those people and provide that support is also evolving in the world of hybrid work. So I think there's a big kind of paradigm shift that we're really kind of moving towards, which is a change in practitioner mindsets. Right? And so a lot of training traditionally, a lot of training, even when you're doing your training needs analysis, it's all about what do you need to learn? That's often the first question. What are the gaps? And look, this is a true generalization. I know we're not doing this always, and we're not doing it in all instances. But traditionally speaking, it's been a lot about what do we need to learn? Oh, they need to learn problem solving. Oh, they need to learn this new technical skill. Oh, they need to learn this or that, right? And that's fine. And then the next question has been, okay, how are we going to roll that out, right? And in traditional learning, we've had just a few modalities or mechanisms to roll that out. You've had classroom training, virtual training, e-learning, and maybe some performer support around coaching, or a blend of those things. But as we move to learning in a hybrid work environment, learning in the flow of work where I'm with a learner continuously, really these questions become more important. Who are my learners? Where are my learners? And why should they care about this? Right? Why is something important to them? Because the more you relinquish control as an L&D group, the more you relinquish control to your learners to take ownership of their own learning, to access learning where and when they're needed, we need to make sure that we are aligning it to who they are, where they are, and why they should care. If we don't answer those questions, then no matter how good your content is, and no matter how interesting the learning intervention is, how well it's designed, people won't participate, or even if they do, they won't transfer onto the job. Right? They won't have lasting retention and application of that knowledge. So these are the questions that we find that we need to be pivoting towards, and that have been having a lot of success in the last couple of years in this transition. And honestly, for us, the last 5 years, we always start with who, where, and why. And then after that, what and how. So I would really encourage that change in order. I can see Mariana said, end user focus, 100%. It's not an optional thing. It's not a buzzword. Design thinking is not a buzzword. It's a must. So some finer points around learning in the flow of work. It's more than just providing virtual training and online assets. It's about learning in the flow of work is about enabling the entire workforce, not just the few. Right? Traditionally, I think we spent a lot of time and money pre-pandemic and in general, focusing on our top performers, our high performers, and maybe some of our low performers, or we might invest a chunk into new joiners. And then there's a big gap in the middle between when you're a new joiner and when you're, when you become a high performer or a leader or a manager. So the great benefit of a hybrid workforce and designing for the flow of work is the ability to scale learning to reach a lot of people. So it's a shift from learning as a word, right? The word learning kind of conjures up images of consuming something or being told something. And if we get rid of the word learning and put in the center of our thinking retention and transfer, then we're going to be more likely to focus our priorities around those critical points. Because what's the point of learning if there isn't retention and there isn't transfer? That's been true for centuries. Not just in the last 2 years of the pandemic. We have to harness personalization through data, right? And so technology starts to come into the mix here around how we can harness LXPs and emerging platforms to really tap into data that will enable us to personalize that learning. Tech is an enabler, but there is no one ring to rule them all. I really want to stress that enough. And this is something I added in because the amount of conversations I have with our partners around the region, and I'm brought into most conversations, and there's this inevitable search for like the one platform, right? I've got to find the one. Is Success Factors it? Is Workday it? Is it going to be some smaller LXP? Is it? There isn't one. It doesn't exist yet that I have seen. I'm not saying it won't come, that it does not exist. So we need to look at tech as an enabler, but it's not going to be the only solution. And it's not just there is one platform or multiple platforms. It's that there is never going to be an end to person contact. There's never going to be a disappearance. When I say digital, I don't think about, I put classroom training, I put virtual training, I put face-to-face coaching on the job. I package all that into digital, because really digital platforms should create a backbone to make all of that stuff more effective and to bring it together. So let's go to our next trend, and you can see a flow here. So because it's hybrid, because people are dispersed, because the way of working is changing, we need to think about learning in the flow of work. But because we're thinking of the changing learning from learning to retention and transfer, from one moment to multiple moments, we need to then look at focusing on, in 2022, evolving L&D roles and mindsets. We cannot meet these challenges and meet learning if we continue to use the same vocabulary, and if we continue to think of the same roles in our learning teams, and if we continue to have the same mindsets. And it's not just your mindsets as L&D practitioners, it's also your learners and your stakeholders' mindsets, because inevitably they're going to be more involved. So let's have a little bit of a look at that. So how a learning program is, in traditional learning is different, right? We used to really focus on live training. Well, now that's digital blended. We used to focus on instructor-led, and now we're moving to self-led. It used to be compulsory and mandatory, and now it's choice. It used to be in a room with peers, and now it's remote. It used to be event-based, and now it's continuous. It used to be about learning something in a block, right? This is, hey, I'm going to deliver you this training. Here it is, and now it's finished. But now it's micro and it's spaced over time. So the nature of a learning program, the language we should use, changes when we're learning in the flow of work. Say learning in the flow of work 20 times and see if you don't get your tongue tied. But also the nature of our roles then change as a result of that. So instead of a learning administrator, now you have a moderator. A moderator is somebody, in GP Asia alone, we've trained up about 15 moderators whose job it is exclusively to manage learning communities, to go and participate in social forums, to find out when a learner's not been on and ask them, are they okay? And to grab great sharing from a learning experience and promote that to the other learners who aren't yet participating. These moderator is probably a better word, is a learner engagement specialist, but that's changing. From an instructional designer, now I'm an architect. I can't just be focused on designing to these 3 learning outcomes. I need to have a view on, if I'm going to be doing this in a learning platform, and I'm going to have this virtual training session, and I'm going to have these e-learnings, and I'm going to have this coaching, how does it all fit together at a programmatic level? Or I'm moving away from the word program to experience, right? Which is another word that I really try to use, a learner experience rather than a learner program. But also at that architect level, who is sitting there thinking about the overall architecture of our learning ecosystem? Not just one program, but all of the programs. Not just one domain of learning, such as leadership or talent, but all domains of learning, including compliance, including product and systems and sales training. Someone or some group has to be sitting in there and looking at that holistically, because otherwise you end up throwing money. I need a different thing for compliance. I needed a different thing for leadership, and I need a different thing here. And you end up just having too much technology, too much content, too much budget being spent. There has to be some architecture to it all. From a program owner, right, who used to be responsible for, getting people to fill up the seats of the program and making sure that there were updates, onto a content curator, right? Someone who's now curating experiences, curating content for a living and breathing population whose needs are changing continuously. From a facilitator to an experience me. I'm not training something. Now I'm in there responding to videos that have been submitted and leaving coaching comments. I'm not necessarily running a training, or I may be running a training, but now I'm in there participating in discussion forums and answering weekly questions. My role as a facilitator is now flexible and it's scattered over time. It's not like I've booked you for this day. There is still, of course, classroom training and virtual training happening, but it's moving from student to consumer or creator. I'm working with a lot of automotive manufacturers right now and retail networks. And we're pushing really hard to try to say, hey, if you're a car salesperson or an after salesperson out there in Vietnam or in China or in Sydney or wherever it may be, you know, you may be an expert. You may have a great way for talking about this feature of a vehicle or for solving this technical problem when repairing a car. How can we get you to capture that and broadcast that? How can I have users, consumers of content and creators of content rather than just a student who graduates? And finally, from a finish line to a program to a continuous and agile learning ecosystem. So these are the roles and the mindsets that are changing as a result of hybrid work, as a result of learning in the flow of work. And I can see a few interesting things coming up in the chat. We've got Oliver saying traditional training models rely on human memory retention. Future models need to explore secondary memory and ease of access. 100%. Humans' memories haven't really changed, right? The way that we learn inherently hasn't changed. You know, what's changed is that we now have technology, to be honest, and design processes that enable us to create learning in ways that just simply weren't possible, that now we can meet learners where they're at and achieve what Oliver's describing. Vythi's talking about learning outcomes must be actionable. Totally agree. Oliver said, well, Oliver and Vythi are very active. Eugenia said, virtual learning on its own has its own challenges. How do you assess the effectiveness to the generational mix of your employees, team, and leadership? Well, Eugenia, if I'm pronouncing that correctly, forgive me if I'm not. I'd like you to describe to me when you say virtual, what does that mean? Does that just mean a WebEx or a Zoom training, or do you mean virtual as in all modalities of digital? If you could clarify that, I'll give you an answer to that. I'll try to answer that question. So some finer points here. Find ways to increase frequent exposure to learning trends and developments. If you don't know what's out there as a practitioner, if you don't expand your own awareness of what's possible, then when you're making business decisions and design decisions, it will be limited to your exposure. And when somebody shows you something that doesn't fit your frame of reference of what you've been exposed to, you're going to reject it. You know, so I'd highly encourage, you know, if you're going to meet this trend of changing L&D mindsets, you've got to go out and expose yourself. And GP's happy to play a role of exposure because we're in the middle, right? We're agnostic. We partner with all sorts of platforms and technologies and design ideas. That's the nature of what we do. But you don't have to come to us. There's other ways to get there. Yeah, so Eugenia's come back and said all modalities of digital. I would suggest that there are limitations. And so I think it's about really understanding experience design. You know, there are times when we have clients, oh, you can't achieve that through a digital platform. And then they're shocked at when you find the right blend, what you can achieve. But I would suggest the big thing takeaway I'd give you, Eugenia, to your question around the challenges and how do you hit at the different levels and different generations is consider these facts. If you can create experiences, whether it's a single modality of learning or a blend of all modalities, if you can ensure that it's ruthlessly relevant to those target learners, if you can make sure that you're finding a way to make it easy to access and participate and flow through, if you're finding a way to make it social and connected, if you're finding a way, if you're finding ways and mechanisms to generate pull, so people are pulled back rather than pushed to participate, and if you're finding ways to respect people's time, and then finally you're looking at the data to see what's going on and making agile decisions accordingly, then you can overcome a lot of that, right? But ultimately, it's horses for courses. If I know who my learners are and I know what we need to achieve and I know what the current starting level is, the level of maturity and the current culture, then I can embed change management and embed a design that helps bring people along for the ride. So it's a complex question, Eugenia, and I promise you we're going to have a session to explore that in the coming months. It's such an important question, but it's an art and a science. So let's see. So both L&D and learners may need to update their vocabulary, right? And we've just done a little bit of that today, but there's so much more out there. Do we all have the same language? We need to get there. We need to devote time to stakeholder education as they increase their involvement, because in a world where learners are more responsible for their own learning, in a world where learning is spaced over time and integrated in the flow of work, stakeholders and learners themselves are inevitably more involved. And if we're going to expect them to be more involved, we need to educate them. and not only educate them, but kind of excite them about it, make sure the benefits are clear to them. So stakeholder education is more important than ever. And we need to carefully consider operational aspects when deploying new learning approaches. A really common challenge that GPCs globally, and I'm talking at MNC 20,000 plus employee companies, is an organization will go out and say, either by themselves or sometimes in partnership with us, we want to deploy X. Like we want to deploy Degreed. We're going to do it. We're just going to do it. It's happening. Or we're going to deploy Edcast. Either they've done an RFP and some provider has won, or maybe we're just going to deploy a new learning design and forget about the name of the technology. What the trend that needs to change here is we need to be thinking about what changes about the way we operationalize and manage and administer learning along with that. So if you deploy Degreed, but you haven't thought about having a content curation team, how you're going to manage content and update content and have a content curation strategy, then you're probably not going to have a great Degreed experience. If you've deployed LinkedIn Learning, but you haven't thought about how I'm going to have a learner engagement strategy and a pathway to drawing out relevant content, then learners are just going to be bombarded with learning that's interesting but not relevant. If you deploy a video type platform like a Lego, or you deploy a MOOC platform like Intrepid, and you haven't considered what types of roles I need to make this successful, then you're going to hit struggles. So big focus here as you move towards these evolving L&D roles is consider what we need to do differently. And I'll just share one little example of that. We work with a large organization that's deployed all sorts of technologies, and they've done so with cost control as one of the central requirements, right? And I get that. It should be about managing cost. But actually what inevitably happens is instead of, now I'm going to automate this and it's gone and I can wash my hands of it, or now this is gone and now we don't have that cost in our budget anymore. It's not really like that. It's really a transfer of energy. Right. And I'll come back to that earlier slide I had here where, maybe I don't need as much instructional design anymore. I don't need as much facilitation time because now I'm doing it virtual. But now instead of that, maybe that facilitator is now spending time as a SME, or maybe that instructional designer is spending time as a curator or something like that. So inevitably there is new energy required in new spaces. It's not like it just stops. So that's kind of a challenge that I see that I think as we move to change our roles, we need to consider. So let's go on to the next trend, and we're continuing to build these. So given all of the things that we've spoken about, there needs to be a prioritization on scalable upskilling and reskilling. So let me ask you a question. We're on to our next poll in Menti. You can still access it via that link and via that code. Tell me, what do you think are the future skills required for L&D? I'm hoping more is going to come in than just SA. Here we go. Takes a minute. Okay. Agile thinking, adaptive, problem solving, human-centered design, measurement. Oh, I'm really glad to see measurement come up there because, gosh, measurement has been a part of workplace learning for as long as I can, forever, but it's rarely deployed in a way that that actually has an impact, and it's not often built into design the way it should be, right? So adaptive is coming up, it's emerging, measurements emerging. Sorry, I probably influenced that. Content curation, agility, flexibility. I'm trying to look at some of these smaller ones. Connection, technology, creative thinking, technology usage, data-driven decisions. Wonderful. Yeah, I totally agree. Data analytics, 100% is an emerging skill for L&D folks. Trying to see if we're seeing many kind of communication skills. I'm seeing innovation, virtual, agile, resilience. But I think we're seeing some themes emerge here, right? I think you're all 100% right that these are emerging kind of skills, behaviors, talents that we're going to have to harness. And that's the thing, right? We're often, as L&D practitioners, we're often kind of put in the center to say, gosh, we're facing all these challenges through disruption and through the pandemic. And we need to, we need to reskill our workforce. But how much time do we spend on reskilling ourselves? And actually there's a strong correlation between the skills that that the workforce needs broadly and that L&D need. So I'm just going to jump ahead here a little bit. Social and thinking skills, data analytics, commercial acumen, business acumen. These are some of the critical future skills for both employees and learning professionals. So this is a trend, right? How are we going to make sure we harness these? And what I was disappointed with, I didn't see enough of the social and thinking skills. If you are going to be learner-centric, if you are going to be adaptable and agile, if you're going to be able to analyze, you're going to need amazing communication skills and collaboration skills and questioning skills and thinking skills. They're so important for our ability to partner with external vendors, with facilitators, with learners, with stakeholders, and with management, and especially with management, because often, L&D see the future, but you've got leaders somewhere at the top who just haven't had the exposure that you have. So you need to be able to package and influence and sell almost, and get your points across. So these are skills that are emerging. Why are they emerging? Right? Why are they emerging? Well, here's some facts from a 2019 EY report in banking. And I know it's specific to banking, but I've seen it be really, really relevant to different degrees in multiple industries. But 50% of banking jobs could see half of their activities automated by 2030, right? And so many industries are seeing some degree of automation or digitization affecting their work, right? Their tasks, the activities. But new skills and new jobs, it's not like it's just going to disappear. New things will be needed. And in that same time frame, they will be replaced by these new skills that we just spoke about. And that by 2030, 25% of our total hours worked will be spent on entrepreneurship, social skills, collaboration, leadership. Why is that? Can someone tell me in the chat? Yeah, consulting skills, Francis said. I'm sure that was about the last bit, but 100% it's also relevant here. Tell me in the chat, why is it that we're going to see a big uptick in our kind of social skills and collaboration skills and leadership skills? Of course, it's important now, but even more so. What's happening to our workforce, to our tasks, to our processes? Anyone tell me in the chat box, in the WebEx chat box? Yeah, Angela's got it. As we automate more, as we digitize more, what's left? What's left is people. What's left is that we still need to work with people. We still need to make things happen. And so if you were once managing a process and now that process is automated, now you're managing a team who are managing that software or that platform. So these are things that can't be replaced by automation. You guys have totally got it, right? And so that's where we're trending towards. And it's true. It's as true of learning as it is of any other part of our business that is changing. So make sure the trend is that you've got to make time to develop these skills and not just give training to everyone else, but give training to yourself, right? Beyond just HR business partner skills. So let's go to our next trend, kind of in that same vein of upskilling and reskilling. Oh, sorry, I'm just jumped backwards a little bit here. Our next trend here, which is around VR and XR. What we're seeing in the industry, and this is going to be different. I was hesitant as to whether or not to put this into APAC because different countries in APAC are in different levels of readiness and maturity and budget, to be frank, to explore this. But technology prices are coming right down as it comes to XR. And so XR, by the way, is a bucket that refers to all augmented reality and virtual reality or mixed reality type applications. But we're seeing that come down a lot. You're seeing Facebook change its name to the metaverse. We're seeing a change in the way that people are interacting. And because of hybrid work, we're likely to see an increase, and it's not always going to be wearing a goggle, but we're likely to see a big increase in 2022 of applications and use cases of XR. of the way that we can harness it for learning, but also the way that we do work. And I'd be really interested now just to ask a question in the chat. Can anyone, if anyone's doing anything with XR related activities, so that's virtual reality, augmented reality, tell me in the chat if you're doing anything in that area or you're planning on doing anything in that area. That would be great to hear, and we'll have a little commentary on it. I know that takes a little bit of time to type these things down. So we're hearing some no plans. And if you haven't got plans, think about, yes, training for apprentices using XR. So I'm guessing that might be like technical training. Is that right, Marie? In which industry are we talking about there? Yeah. Okay. Oh, great. In the mining industry. Great. Yeah. So we're seeing a lot of that. And really there's also a hybrid nature to this too. So we've been doing situations where we're running there'll be some e-learning in the automotive space, for example. And then there'll be a live virtual session where we're equipping a master technician with a webcam onto their chest. Right. So users can see what's going on and can participate. So that's kind of like a lo-fi quick version of mixing reality, of using virtual training and webcams or a GoPro or something like that, and trying to blend things together, right? And then having the trainees then go ahead and go and do that with their own cameras, right? And this is just the nature of how hard it is to get face-to-face training these days, right? But when there's a step up to that, so we're working with organization right now to develop VR training where around safety and fire safety. So we're getting, experts in the same virtual space with trainees where they can interact with a virtual fire hydrant and interact with virtual gear and actually see each other in the same space and see each other's hands, see each other's areas, and they can support and adjust and adapt with each other. So what I'm talking about there is VR and XR doesn't have to be a singular experience. Now you can do social and collaborative experiences in a virtual space. We're also seeing it relating to sales and service with AI driven, or not even AI driven, but VR experiences for handling complaints, for dealing with sales situations and having to respond to those with a 3D presence, and that's nothing new. So VR and XR is seeing a lot of applications beyond just technical training. We've got virtual welding tools that are being used. And so it really is blowing up. And because of the nature of, especially in technical training, but also in services training, we're seeing that this is becoming more and more important for organizations and will continue in 2022. So one of the last two trends we've only got a couple of minutes less, is the rise of the boundaryless academy. And what we're talking about here is we've got to grow mindsets and capabilities that enable the workforce to change and evolve. And to do that, we can't just have our learning academies sitting within a box saying that these are the limits. We're only going to hit them. If I come back to those moments of learning need, we're only going to hit our learners in that first area of moment of learning need. We need to have academies that actually consider the full gamut of moments of learning need. So we're talking about reaching across traditional boundaries, connecting academies into wider employee lifecycle. So how can our academy tap into employee onboarding and reboarding? How can we use our academy to tap into identification of talent? How can we use our academy to tap into technical and other areas, so make sure that full employee life cycle, including benefits, compensation, all sorts of things, how can we use that to feed in? Because there's so much data coming out about employee performance in the learning space that it has the ability to inform and influence employee life cycle, engagement decisions, all sorts of different areas. We're talking about incorporating accreditation with institutions and, of course, micro-credentialing as well. If you guys are involved in micro-credentialing, to make sure that learners feel like that it's not just a company boundary, but it's a boundary that extends outside of my organization. So we're seeing that that's going to increase and expand in 2022. Not new, but even more important. I'd like to ask you guys now as a quick chat question, why do you think, if you consider what we're talking about with hybrid work and what's going on in our industry in terms of resignations? Why do you see that as being important? Here we're talking about academies across boundaries. I can tell you our research into career tells us that employees, yeah, it's engagement. It's about giving employees, it's about creating opportunities for employees that just simply aren't present in their job. How can I feel like I'm growing and evolving when I'm not getting a promotion? How can I feel like what I'm doing is actually contributing to my growth in this company and beyond? Because the reality is I might change companies, right? But what can I do to really enable that, right? And so that's where this becomes such an important factor for 2022. So everything that you're talking about on this chat, transferable skills, job fulfillment, it's never been not relevant, but it's even more relevant in 2022, hence why it's our second last trend. And our final trend, and I'm sorry, we're going to just run a minute over, is about sustainable integration of innovation as a capability. So I think that's a really interesting one because a lot of us talk about innovation and it becomes a throwaway word, or inevitably in our teams, we get some people who are very innovative and a lot of that innovation energy comes from one group or a few individuals. But we really need to figure out how can we work it into our organization. So what I could suggest is a couple of tips that we have implemented. But why is it a trend? Well, I've put this as our last trend for today because of everything that we've discussed. The finishing line of the pandemic and the finishing line of hybrid work is a mirage. There isn't a finishing line. It's a new normal and it's continuing to evolve and it hasn't settled down yet. People are still trying to figure out what's going on. Because of the nature of this, we need to change the way we're thinking about the way we invest our L&D budgets. And we need to shift away from a focus on learning to a focus on retention and transfer. Because ultimately, who cares about learning if it doesn't have retention and transfer? And we need to be meeting learners where they are. We need to be looking at new technologies. All of these things point to a need to have sustainable innovation. So we're talking about innovation in terms of mindset, but we're also talking about innovation in terms of structure. So I can just share a brief story of something GP does. And one of the things that we built is the Innovation Kitchen. And the reason why we built that is because of a big part of GP's business is managing learning for global organizations. So the vendor management, training administration, design, LMS hosting, implementation, all of that kind of the management of a learning organization. And because of that, we're always in the middle of this conversation. GP, can you go out to market and find this? Or GP, we've got this problem. And we knew that we had to be agnostic. We knew we had to be kind of ahead of the curve. And so we set up this Innovation Kitchen. And we set up a set of principles, guidelines, parameters of what is this Innovation Kitchen going to be about? What are the goals of it? What is the output of it? And what are the structures and systems we're going to deploy within that Innovation Kitchen to meet that desired output that our business needs? And so it's not just about establishing the team. We put processes, procedures, objectives, and goals and measurable outcomes on that group, which I'm a member of actually, to make sure that it wasn't just a throwaway group that no one ever really participated in. And the reason why we did that is because we needed to be ahead of the curve to meet client challenges. Now, what's your version of that in your company? What is the innovation challenge you're trying to address? How are you going to populate it? And what systems and processes can you put in place that will drive output from that group? So here are some finer points around that. Challenge assumptions always. Be learner and business centric. I know we spoke a lot about learner centricity, but in design thinking in the empathy phase, I put learner and business centricity in the empathy phase. I need to understand not just the learners, but the context of the business, the culture of the business, the goals and outcomes of the business, the limitations of the business. What does the science and the research say? We're finally seeing research coming out of educational sciences that's been going on for decades, starting to have a really big impact because often there's a gap between research and practice. We're seeing that gap be filled now. So how can we tap into the science and research behind learning to inform smart business decisions? How can we create diverse innovation groups? So emphasis on diversity, right? Mix of diversity is going to give you better outcomes when it comes to innovation. And we've got to be able to adopt new strategies and technologies, but we've got to be careful about it. We've got to be deliberate about it, which comes back to my point around having that careful strategy up front on how we're going to enable learning in the flow of work. So I've summarized a few trends here, guys, and it was just the big picture stuff. And I tried to give some little nuggets throughout without going into too much detail. And what we're going to do now is I want to ask you guys, now having looked at those trends, I've picked out a few kind of areas within those trends. The final poll that I'd like you to consider here is, where would you like us to deep dive further, right? These sessions are never about selling services. They're always about knowledge and learning and sharing. So I've had to pick a few. I could only pick so many. So go into the poll and tell us, in the future, where would you be interested in seeing us deep dive? Okay, we're seeing building learning strategy blueprints. I'm really stoked to see that coming up as something that's important. And it's direct correlation to designing learning in a flow of work. Because really it tackles the question of what comes first, the chicken or the egg? Do I go out and innovate in my learning and start throwing money at things and building things? Or do I build the learning blueprint first? Do I define my academy? And if I do that, how do I do that? What are the dimensions of my academy or my business that I need to consider? Right? And so I'm really stoked that I'm seeing that. And I'm also really happy to see measurement and analytics coming up. That also feeds into it, because if I don't have measurement in the center of my thinking, we will never measure. So guys, thank you so much for your time. We're going to take this data. Please continue to put this in. And I really like, we'll keep an eye out for more webinars of this nature. We'll make sure they're interactive. But thank you so much. Have a fantastic 2022 ahead. And yeah, just to really appreciate everyone joining. We'll see you next time round. So I'm going to say thanks to everyone in the chat as well. I hope this has been valuable for you all. So feel free to drop us an email if you need anything. We'll follow up with you guys. But in the meantime, just have a great year and good luck with your transformation. Good luck with having a productive 2022.
This webinar is brought to you by GP Strategies. Together we can create a world where business excellence makes possibilities achievable. You can access more webinars or download additional resources at gpstrategies.com/resource-library.